Hello, digital learners. My name is Matt Spears, and this is Chesterfield's last Digital Learning Day presentation for 2017. So thanks for dialing in. Uh, this session is talking about creativity with guide rails and why it might be important to think about putting some creative restraints on your students. So first thing I want to do is jump right straight to where you can find some resources. So if you're in Chesterfield County and you have access to the EdTech Hub, you can hit training and events and go to Digital Learning Day. And at the bottom, you should have access to a resource and links. And what that should be is a one tab that has aggregated all these resources. So we're going to jump all over the place this afternoon. If you're not, and you head to Google and you run a search for EdTech Hub, the top result or two or three or four are our EdTech Hub. And so you can get there the same way by just heading to the digital learning page for teaching or training and events. So here we go. This is creativity with guide rails. So what we're going to talk about today is a couple different ways to think about creativity. The first being that creativity might just need some sandboxing. This guy, Jason Fried, had a great book called Rework, and that by putting yourself inside a sandbox and only focusing laser-like on what you need to get done really forces you to put a top-notch product forward. And so embrace the sandbox. The next has to do with everybody has the ability to be creative. It is fundamentally wrong to think that Picasso was just creative. He woke up one day and had the ability to create what he did. It's a process, and you got to figure out how to get there. And so that's the understanding there by Ed Catmull, who wrote the book Creativity Inc. and founded Pixar. Some other important things to consider. Ken Robinson, who might have the most popular TED Talk on the web, assigns creativity an additional quality of value, in that you can be creative all you want and create all kinds of things over there and pictures over there and content over here, but unless it's contributing value to something, it's really not that creative. Last thing I want to point out, and this rings true for some of the folks that are educators, is vulnerability has some significance in the creative process. And if we're going to ask students to really put themselves out there and create something brand new, you're asking them to be vulnerable. And so we're going to talk about how we can help kids both be creative, put some guidelines around that, but also talk about what you as an educator might do to help them be successful after they've created or have actually put their creation out there. So first, let's talk about the creative process. There's a bunch of varieties, but I'm going to talk about 4 steps in the creative process, and it starts with preparation. So this has everything to do with researching, exposing yourself to the scenario in which you're creating within, getting and brainstorming with folks, acquiring experience. There is nothing off the table in the preparations. Often folks that create some of the Pixar movies go to locations. When they did Ratatouille, they actually sent some of the animators to Paris to dine for weeks in high-rated restaurants, but during the day they spent time in the sewers like the rats. So nothing is off the table as you're preparing and gathering this experience to try and create what it is you're being asked to create. So let's talk about how technology might help with that. So first thing I want to point you to, and again, this should be part of that link set, is a link to a folder that's got just a ton of places that are Venn diagram-esque or drawings that can help kids brainstorm. So different brainstorming activities, aggregations, plot structure things, tree diagrams that can help kids start to put ideas together. Next thing I want to point you at is a raw resource that Google is creating and folks are contributing to in the Arts and Culture Center in Google. It's absolutely stellar. It's chock full of primary resources that kids can put their fingers on. I actually pointed my first grader at this particular resource not too long ago to see some information on Thomas Jefferson. Next thing I want to point you to is in Chesterfield, we have access to some of the powerful databases that Gale puts together. And these are pre-vetted things that our kids, all of our teachers and all of our kids have access to. So great place to go for high quality information that kind of spans all kinds of content. And lastly, Google does a great job of trying to index the web and bring information into the hands of just about everybody. And so one of the caveats and one of the small pockets that they try to do that is Google Scholar. So you have the ability to kind of not just Google the web, but only Google stuff that's actually published. And you have some fun search criteria you can play around with on Google Scholar. So the next thing that is part of the creativity process, of the creative process, is the incubation period. And I think this is a fun one, mostly because it's kind of where you want to get kids or get folks kind of stepping away from the idea and all that preparation work, and where they've saturated their brain with all this information. They're not quite ready to produce anything yet. They kind of need a brain break. And I think the most famous story is literally taking a bath, and Archimedes hopped in the tub, and as soon as he hopped in the tub, the crown fell in, and he's got displacement and goes from there. So the incubation period actually has some stories of success hidden behind it. So wanted to point you, one of my absolute favorite resources to kind of go and decompress and enjoy my own time to think about my thoughts and be inspired in some cases is YouTube. So this is a playlist of a year in search that helps paint a picture of years and years over time, and what were some of the most popular searches, kind of the nostalgic feel. And in some cases, you just want to completely decompress. And in that case, like the People Are Awesome channel is pretty stellar. You got some people doing some pretty amazing things. So think about ways you can get kids to continue to maybe decompress as they're creating. So great way to do that is to focus on engaging activity like YouTube or video watching. So next part of the creation process is actually when you've stumbled upon your idea. Holy cow, I'm ready to actually present and think about, start building this thing. So the illumination period is literally the eureka moment that Archimedes had when he figured out displacement would work. And technology really lends itself well to this illumination period, because you're not going to come up with the perfect solution, or whatever you create isn't going to be perfect the first time you get it out of your hands. It iterates over time, and it's important to kind of have a history of that and look back on where you came and how you got there. And the process is just as important in some cases as the product at the end. So what I wanted to do is actually showcase this actual revision history of this actual slide deck. So as I'm creating my finished product here, this is me over time. And so what you're seeing is, here's my revision history, and I'm making changes all the way up till today. And this is just a complete history of how I built this particular slide presentation. So I can go all the way back here and look at, oh, good grief, look at all this gray. These things are all over the place. Don't have everything done yet. Certainly missing the entire creative process that we're talking about right now in this particular version. So technology really builds itself to iterate over time. And I've come back to presentations days and weeks and months later and figured out, hey, I need to probably go back and pull that back in and revisit what I was thinking about at that particular moment. So just because you come up with an illuminated idea and what you're going to create doesn't mean you need to think about it as a I'm done situation. You need to make this thing better and better and better, continue to iterate. And the last step is your verification. And verification is important because this is your check step. This is, if I was a business and I made something brand new, does the market support it? Is anybody going to buy what I'm selling? Does it actually solve the problem? And for a teacher, what you're looking at here is, does this actually match what I was trying to get my kids to create. So in that vein, what we want to talk about is putting a rubric in the hands of kids so that they know what they're shooting at. It might be important for maybe for them to one, have access to a rubric on the onset of the project, but two, maybe they have some influence in creating what this rubric looks like as they're trying to figure out what they need to create to solve the particular problem. So very important to have a metric in which to evaluate your creativity upon. Sometimes that's a rubric, and sometimes that's, is anybody buying my product? So want to keep cruising through this creative process. So we're starting to run out of time. So it is a process. It is absolutely something that you learn over time. And if you don't believe that, this is a really cool story where somebody kept creating one of the first iPod versions and brought it right into Steve Jobs' office, and he didn't care if it functioned well. He was after one of the objectives of it being absolutely the smallest thing that we could create, and dropped it right into the fish pond, and bubbles came out, and he said, nah, you can make it smaller, go back and build something else. So this is a process, and it happens over time, and you're going to hit roadblocks, and that verification step is important. So now I want to talk about real quick some of the things that you can put in place to help students really focus in laser-like on creating something of high quality, and kind of putting them in the sandbox. So start to think about time being a guide rail. So let's say you have 5 hours to cut down a tree. The old fable is you're going to spend about 4 hours sharpening your axe. So let's take the 4 hours out. Let's say you have all of this class period to complete this particular project. Go. Sometimes that might be a good thing. Sometimes it might not. Or maybe your presentation can only last 1 minute. And in that 1 minute presentation, you have to have 30 or 40 slides and move through them with particular purpose. That's a significant task for somebody to undergo, but it really forces the presentation to be creative. So think of time as a great way to help students be both limited, but force them into a creative sandbox. Resources. So let's say, and this often was done to me, where I'm in a project and I only have access to a specific set of resources. And if I'm thinking about historically here, maybe I only have access to a certain flavor of a political agenda. I am only forced to digest a certain handful of opinions or outlets for information. That could significantly skew my end product, which is, in this case, my output on the world, or my world lens. So consider putting different pockets of resources into different groups of kids' hands, or really focusing them in onto some really high quality research that maybe they've never had an exposure to before. Next, I want to talk about how kids are delivering their final product. So there's all kinds of fun stuff you can do with technology. So maybe they only have one slide that they can create, or maybe they have to create a video that is less than 15 seconds to convey this entire project. Limitations like that in terms of medium and time can really force a student to be very critical about what their message is and the potency of it. So another really cool thing is you could actually go old school and use a document camera and have the student's presentation be live drawing. Think of medium and boxing kids into the medium element of creativity. Last suggestion I want to toss at you is limiting the ability for kids to use words or characters. So think of the success of Twitter is probably predicated upon it being very small space to share information or share an idea. And I think that's one of the reasons why it took off and was so popular. So think of the amount of words and what kids have the ability to use as they present. Gonna kind of wrap up our presentation here and make sure you understand that one, kids have to be absolutely comfortable and being vulnerable in what they create. And I'm going to leave you with a closing thought of the Man in the Arena speech, and making sure kids know that when they're creative, they're getting ready to hop in the arena, and everybody's going to start taking shots at what they created. And you want to make sure that those kids really understand that, hey, you're in the arena, you're making a big deal of yourself. Be sure and understand that um, where the valuable input's coming from, and that's for the people that are creating with you right along the way. So thanks so much for dialing in today, and look forward to seeing you next time on Digital Learning Day.